Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. I trust that everyone had an enjoyable weekend and an extended weekend as well, because Monday was a holiday. Therefore, we had no For the Record on Monday. We certainly had some nice showers, and I'm not sure whether or not those showers interrupted some of the festivities that were planned and organized for the weekend as well. But here we are today, Wednesday, the 15th day of November 2017. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. As you know, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I'm your host, Orit Connor. My two co-hosts, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield, are with me. You're welcome to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. And we also have a WhatsApp number as well, where you can send a text or you can leave a voice note, and we will either play back your voice or we will read what you have sent in the text. That number is 925-3261. So a WhatsApp number, 925-3261. And of course, if you have WhatsApp on your phone, then you know that's a free phone call for you, as opposed to that having to pay for that as well. So that WhatsApp number, 925-3261, and many people have been using it to send us messages as well. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping this morning as well. And, we know lots of people celebrate birthdays in November, probably one of the more popular months for birthdays as well. And this one is coming in advance because her birthday is tomorrow. But we want to send a happy birthday when it comes to Miss Mary Thompson, formerly known as Miss Mary Marin, for those of you who are old enough to know that. She is the wife of the late Mr. Norberg Thompson, and I must say that she taught me in Sabbath school at the Seventh-day Adventist Church right down there where the Butterfield Bank, one of the Butterfield buildings is now, and I think HSM now occupy that building there, almost opposite Cable and Wireless. At Seventh-day Adventist Church there. My mother, on weekends, Saturdays, you go to Seventh-day Adventist Church. Sunday, you go to Church of God. So, I wasn't tied to any religion. It was to make sure that you're not out in the yard, out on the street playing. So keep you occupied. Saturdays, Seventh-day Adventist. Sundays, Church of God. So Miss Mary was my Sabbath school teacher, over there as well. And I noticed I said, her maiden name was Marin because her father was Mr. George Marin, and I believe her mother was Miss Rose Marin.
Yes,
Miss
Rose.
They had a big Jew plum tree behind
That's
their
right.
yard. Those were the biggest Jew plums that you ever saw in the back of their yard. They're loaded with Jew plums all the time. And of course, their house was, where the Kentucky Fried Chicken is there now. That used to be the Marin shoe store, and sell the shoes and hats and stuff like that there. And right next to that was Miss Mary's parents' house, Mr. George's house. So want to wish her a happy birthday tomorrow when it comes. We didn't want to wait until Friday because then we would have to wish her a belated happy birthday. So a very happy birthday to Miss Mary this morning. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Dr. Steve now because I'm sure that he'll probably have some fun moments, to talk to reminisce about with, Miss Mary and Mr. Norberg as well.
Good morning Good morning to you, Mr. For the Record, and good morning to my co-host, Teresa Pitcairn, and good morning to all the people and For the Record land and locally and those abroad. Yes, I have fun memories. I was similar to you. I went to the Seventh-day Adventist school. I went to your mother's school, Miss Myrtle School, and I transferred to the Seventh-day Adventist school. That's the only school I went to in Cayman.
Okay.
And those two, I left the Seventh-day Adventist school in grade 12, and I used to go down to the Marin's place also, to that Jew plum tree. I remember that we go around the little road there between Miss Doris' shop.
Miss Doris' shop, yes.
And the Marin's fence, and go around the corner there and come out there by Miss, we call it Convage's place.
Yes, yes.
And come around there. And I used to go to the, I never went to the Seventh-day Adventist church, but I went to the Seventh-day Adventist school. I did go to 2 Sunday schools too. On some Sundays I went to the chapels Sunday school, and the other Sundays I went to the Presbyterian Sunday school. One of my teachers in the Presbyterian Sunday school was Miss. She was a customs officer. She was I forgot her. She was one of the first.
Marcia.
Miss Marcia.
Marcia. Yes.
And a lady called Miss Yona. Mm-hmm. Miss Yuna, who used to work in the government savings bank.
Miss Yuna Bush.
And I remember you had to bring home all these cards, these Sunday school cards, and you have to refresh yourself with the sayings on them, and then go back and next Sunday and be able to recite them.
Yeah, and then during Easter and Christmas and stuff, you would have the Easter programs or the Christmas programs.
That's right.
You do your part, either recitation or you're involved in a play or something
That's
like that.
right.
I don't know if the churches still do these things like that,
but Miss Mary's sister was my colleague in school. Bethlew Marion.
Okay.
And Bethlew now was married to another colleague of mine, Bob Thompson.
Bob Thompson, yes.
They were my schoolmates, and Jack and Jill, LaWarren Bawden, and the commissioner's son and daughter, Brian Smith, and his sister Marguerite, who was here some months ago. And so, and I remember Bethlew because Marion was they were the agent for Studebaker cars. And she always drive this really beautiful Studebaker car to school. Oh. And we would always get a ride in it and stuff. And I think several months ago, it probably was last year, I was talking to Bethlew about it and reminiscing about the old days. But Mary she was much older than me. My teachers in the Seventh-day Adventist school was the Crowfoots. I don't know if you remember them. Mr. and Mrs. Crowfoot.
No.
Miss Crowfoot was the head mistress, and we had Miss Carby and some Jamaican teachers from Jamaica, and then there was the Dr. Cafferty and his wife. They were all from Maryland in the United States. And it was a great time to be alive in those days, to be growing up in Cayman. It was a great time. There were a lot of things to do, and I have to tell you this. So you talk about Easter and all that stuff. I was going to the Marin's church, the chapel school. Church
of God, yeah.
And Orion Marin's mother used to have these Easter egg haunts.
And Easter right up there by where Dr. Edlin Marin's house is now.
Yeah.
There used to be a lot of sand and a lot of almond trees and stuff like that.
Yes.
They'd bury the Easter eggs in the sand, yeah.
And Boy D. Bird and I were going up to fish up in the old it's what's called Petra Plantation then, but it's now called Grand Old House.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw where they were hiding the eggs. And so we went down there on Easter, and we gathered the majority of the eggs because we knew where they were. And we thought that they were ours. And when we had to give them back, we were very upset. You see, because we were like 10, 12 at the time, and we didn't understand that was not right to take all the eggs. And sometimes Orrin Marion, if he's listening, he will every now and again he reminds me of how his mother chastised me for have a preview of where the eggs were hidden. And took all the eggs.
But it seems as if you and Boyd had several escapades together. The one when you all were playing cricket and with Mr. Earl Wood and the commissioner when he came by and what the donkey did to the commissioner.
Yes, Boyd was my good friend. And of course we were about the same age. And we played cricket together, and we were in the Boy Scouts together, and we traveled together. We went to Jamaica together, to Jamboree together. We did a lot of things together. He was a really good friend of mine, Boydie Bird. He was a really, really smart kid when he was growing up, and and a good athlete and so forth. And in those days, the Boy Scouts, the social program for us was the Boy Scout. It was everything for us. It was everything for us, Boy Scouts and cricket.
Yep.
And boxing.
Yep. Miss T, good morning.
Hi.
How was your week and weekend?
Very quiet. I was good. As you guys were reminiscing, I was just thinking a little of how different my childhood was, because my mom left Cayman when I was a toddler. She was pursuing a career as a police.
Okay.
So the first 10 years of my life was in Jamaica. And it was, I went to Alpha Academy, and then I went to, it's weird because at that time, you were in the era with Michael Manley, and education took on a different role and a different perspective, so that persons like myself, for example, had an opportunity to get a free education from the time I was very young. And it's interesting, as the story goes, my mom was away at the time when I was very little, and she was in New York, and my aunt was taking care of me, and a nun that used to walk by the yard that we were living in, and my aunt's husband was away at sea, used to see me and have a conversation with me, and apparently even then I was a little talawag, but she said to my aunt that I was too smart to be at home doing nothing. And it's interesting in that the society then actually took an interest in the kids, and I must have started Alpha Academy from the time I was about 3.5, 4. So, and then of course I then returned to Cayman when I was about 10, 11. And growing up at a time when I was introduced to things like Ring Ding, the Little Theater with Louise Bennett and stuff, the barn, we lived right next door to the barn in Norwood Avenue, so my whole first 10 years were filled with a lot of culture. When I came to Cayman, it was a little different, but I was exposed to a lot of strong women. I mean, people like Miss Geely, Miss Theolin, Miss Irma, Miss Evie are first. Those are the women that had a huge impact. Miss Pearl with Girls Brigade, as you speak.
Yes,
And Miss Alma walked with a stick in Sunday school, and you dare not, you had to be pretty disciplined and stuff like that. But there was always an atmosphere of care and nurturing. That's what I mostly remember about that period in my life between 11 and say 19. And it's one of the reasons why it was very important for me to give back, especially when I returned. I used to tutor kids for A-levels for free. I used to teach the Sunday school classes, organize the plays and stuff. So that sense of the importance of community, giving back and understanding, and you knew where the boundaries were. And I mean, the same way in which Miss Alma felt okay in disciplining us, or Miss Christine, if she saw us behaving in a way that she felt was inappropriate, that you didn't want word to get back to your parents or relatives that you were misbehaving in any way. Before we go, I'd like to do a shout out for my friends from the Cayman Islands High School, the graduating class of 1977. We're having our big bash to celebrate I'm not going to embarrass us and tell you how many years it's been since we graduated. But please contact Brenda Archer at 916-1811. That's Brenda Archer, 916-1811, or Ellen Ann Vernon, 926-0959. Ellen Ann Vernon, 926-0959. Wishing everybody a pleasant week.
Okay, folks, please stay tuned for the record with Art Connor, Miss Teresa Pitcairn, and Dr. Steve Macfield will be back immediately after these messages. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield, Miss Teresa Pitcairn. Want to remind you of our WhatsApp number, 925-3261. If you want to send messages in, our phone lines are always open, also open as well. We're going to be here for about 10 minutes more talking. Then, of course, we will have our 8 o'clock news. I want to go to some international news. And we see where in Zimbabwe, formerly known as Southern Rhodesia, during the colonial days, they were considered to be Rhodesia. And then you had Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia is now what is known as Zambia, and Southern Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe. As we all know, that all African countries went through some military conflict in order to gain their independence. The colonial powers simply did not want to give up their economic grip that they had on the African countries because of the vast natural resources that were there and how they benefited. When I say they, the colonial powers benefited from those vast natural resources. So we saw people being jailed, those national leaders. In Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, you had Robert Mugabe, and you had a gentleman by the name of Joshua Nkomo. Now, you had two tribes in Rhodesia, prominent tribes. One was called Ndebele, and I forget the name of the other one, but I'll find that. But anyway, Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe, both of them were always vying for power. Eventually, Robert Mugabe prevailed, and we know what has happened during the Robert Mugabe era. He has continued to rule Zimbabwe. There are conflicting stories in terms of what he's done in terms of expelling foreigners, Brits who had been there for years, who owned, quote unquote, owned the property there, and he has expropriated a lot of that property, given it back to the Africans for them to have their lands back and everything. But unfortunately, in many of these countries that achieved independence, many through armed struggle, what we ended up with was one colonial power being replaced by a local colonial power, if you may want to call it that. So you end up with some of these one-party states and things of that nature. So we now see Robert Mugabe has been placed under arrest because of many of the excesses of his regime are now having an impact on the local population. And the chief of the armed forces in intervening spoke to the fact that the freedom fighters that helped to liberate Zimbabwe, which was then Southern Rhodesia, they're the ones now that are being targeted. We saw where the vice president ended up going into exile because he was being targeted. So the army has stepped in. It'll be interesting to see what happens from there. What you don't want to happen from there is now that you end up with Robert Mugabe gone, the military army stepping in and saying, okay, we're taking over and we will have elections in 5 years' time. So you end up with a, with a military dictatorship for 5 years. If they're going to replace Robert Mugabe, then what they need to do is they need to ensure that free and fair elections are held as quickly as possible to restore civilian rule. Comments?
I was just thinking that, if my memory serves me correctly, that Mugabe is the longest living leader in a country. He's about 92, 93-ish. I can't. But when you started to speak, my mind started to wonder about him. And so I believe, I'm almost sure that he's the longest living leader in any country. And you're right. By the way, the military is saying that they don't have a coup, that it's just a sort of a transition. And I suspect they don't want to spook the economy too much. But it'll be interesting to see the process that takes place after. I somehow doubt that you're going to see an automatic move towards dictatorship, towards democracy. There'll be some, and I'm not sure that democracy is. I mean, it's the best. We are told that it's the best form of leadership that we as human beings have managed to organize. But there are other communities that don't have democracies who appear to be a lot superior to what we see. And my mind goes right to that session yesterday with Mr. Jeff Sessions, that don't know nothing, can't remember nothing, has selective amnesia, can't quite get anything. And this is why, Mr. Trump was able to be as successful as he was in recent times, because people are so disillusioned and they feel disenfranchised with what we see now with democracies, where people take it for granted that once you are elected, you automatically become a career politician, and that's something that is necessarily good for community.
Dr. McPhail?
Well, it's very ironic now that Mugabe finds himself in the same position of his predecessor. You remember Ian Smith, who was
60s.
Ian Smith, who was the leader of Rhodesia, and when the war started, for the liberation war started, I mean, Mugabe was in jail for a long time. He was in detention,
both here and Nkrumah.
And Nkrumah for a long time, and Mugabe prevailed. And it seems to me that those people in Africa really who try to take the democratic system so far away from its historical origins never really survived much. Mugabe tried to counteract the master status trait of the colonial era, but he became the master too himself. And you see this in the state of Israel, where they've suffered under the Germans, and they were doing almost the same thing to their neighbors as the Germans did to them in Poland and all those places. And so you wonder, how did people fall into those traps? Now, the only place in Africa where you see where rationale prevail and humanity prevail and rule of law prevail was probably under the regime of Mandingo. Mandimba. You know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
When he came out of jail after spending 29 years in jail, he started a different regime. His regime was based on humanity and tolerance and stuff. So Mandela started a completely different thing. Mugabe is one of those people who deliberately put power first, and the danger that he fell in is that there was not, if he had allowed a smooth transition of power from him to other people, but he tried to put his wife in the position of power, and I think that's when the army had enough.
Okay, folks, we're going to 8 o'clock news. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Ms. Teresa Pitker and Dr. Steve McField. We were talking about the international situation and the situation in Zimbabwe with Robert Mugabe. I told you that I would tell you the name of the two dominant tribes in Zimbabwe, and those were the Ndebele and the Shona tribes there as well. A lot of you may be wondering, why are we talking about Zimbabwe so far away? Well, why we're talking about it to show you the transition from being a colony, being colonized, to gaining your independence. And in many instances, a lot of these countries found themselves under some sort of dictatorial rule after that. That did not extend to Africa alone. It also extended to the Caribbean to a certain extent, where you see political leaders entrenching their position in the leadership and not wanting to relinquish it, and that has always been to the detriment of those countries and to the peoples of those countries as well when that occurs. So we were talking about Zimbabwe, we were talking about the 60s, the negotiations that took place, and I think it was in 1964 that I looked at, between 64 68, that Zimbabwe gained its independence. There was a strong man there by the name of Ian Smith, and the Brits took some unusual steps to remove him from power. I remember reading about the negotiations taking place on board a British warship off the coast of Africa, in negotiating with Ian Smith, as well. But let's look at the comparisons to the Caribbean and to countries. Even up until recently, I was reading a story about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we see there where Prime Minister Gonsalves is now positioning one of his sons.
To take his place.
Yes, he has reshuffled portfolios and everything, and one of the senior members of the party, along with his son, now are both sharing power almost equally in terms of the responsibilities that they have. And no doubt at the end of the day, there's going to be a conflict in terms of who assumes the leadership after Ralph Gonsalves leaves office. That eventually, it happens. It happens everywhere. It happens within parties where there is a challenge for the leadership. Why is it that people are want to have that power? Now we see in countries like Zimbabwe, for instance, the riches that the Mugabe family has amassed as a result of the position that they hold. Look at what we see in the news about their sons, the incident in South Africa with the South African model that was allegedly assaulted by Grace Mugabe in the hotel room, and the opulence under which their sons were living. That's what it is all about in many countries. In countries like the Cayman Islands, where we don't have those natural resources, what is the urge for power? Why is it that they want to have power? Is it for other economic reasons or what? But there is always that innate nature of a politician. Once they get into the trappings of power, of wanting to hold on to it, not wanting to let it go. You use an example of Nelson Mandela in South Africa. When he came out of prison, he decided the length of time that he would serve as president of South Africa, and he would step down after. Unfortunately, what South Africa has now, many people will say with Jacob Zuma, that things are almost reverting back because you have again the dominance of the political party there. But I want to hear from you, from the both of you.
Well, he was,
and in terms of the Caribbean context.
Well,
as well.
For instance, Mandela was not seeking the trappings of power, which is control and opulence. Remember, Mandela was the first person who brought in the conciliatory system, where let's talk about this.
Truth and Reconciliation
Commission. Yes, and he did not impose the master trait syndrome, which everybody seems to do once they get in power. They don't want to leave, and it's happening in the Caribbean too. We see it in the Caribbean, and when people have to leave, they get really upset. They get tired. They get sick, and they have all kinds of rationale, self-justifying rationale for staying in power, and it's because power is the ultimate aim and goal. They're not using power to benefit their people and to justify their people, and to impose constitutional affirmativeness. It's the opposite. They're using power to justify their own existence and their own position for them and their family and their friends. And this is what's happening in Zimbabwe now, and this is what's happening around the Caribbean. I was surprised that Dr. Gonzalez is doing this, because I met him when he was here the last time. When he gave the keynote speech at the University of US College of the Cayman Islands, and I thought he was a great guy. And but they're all the same. Once they taste the power, and once they're imbued by the trappings of power, it is the same thing, the same results.
It becomes addictive, it seems. Miss T, chime in here.
Yes, so I'm just listening, and as much as what I'm about to say wasn't what I intended to say, but segue into Steve's comment about democracy in the Caribbean. Can I just invite us to focus a little bit on China? To the extent, I know that China and Zimbabwe were very close trading partners. Indeed, the Confucius Peace Award, interestingly, was given to Mr. Mugabe and Putin and Castro as well. But I raised the issue of democracy and what China has, which I believe is described as a vertical meritocratic democracy. And the view that they hold is that democracy is good when you're at the lower limb of leadership. So because it's like leading a small community. It's easier to evaluate the culture, the moral culture of that particular community. What the Chinese, I believe, have done, and it's a model perhaps developed out of some of Aristotle's thinking, and as a result of the failure with populism that we had years ago, in that when someone enters politically, the system politically, they view them from the lower realm. It's based on merit, and it gives the individual who aspires for political leadership an opportunity over a 20, 30-year period to develop and so on. And the view, as I understand it, is that because a big country like China is very complex and it's difficult to lead and control, what they prefer is to have an institutionalized system whereby you go through a process, people observe you, and they consider whether or not you have acquired the skills that is worthy of leadership. And the view is that, you don't want somebody that is considered unstable or have someone emerging through a democratic system, as we now see with Mr. Trump, because their culture is such that the margin for mistake, they would prefer that to be smaller. And this is not to suggest that what they have now is the perfect system, but I compare that to what we see, for example, with our neighbors in the north, with their brand of democracy versus what the Chinese is doing. I understand it, based on what we are seeing now, is that when the U.S. leader went to Asia, he was literally excluded from the discussions with respect to trade talks and so on, and the Chinese took the lead. So there is something to be said about reviewing a system like that that's a little different. And I'm not suggesting that the history of what the Chinese went through is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just looking at the structure that we see today. So that's just my take on democracy versus what the Chinese seem to be developing today.
Okay, folks, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, the discussion will continue with Dr. Steve Macfield and Ms. Theresa Pitcairn. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Oric Connor. In the studio with me, Dr. Steve Macfield, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn. We initially started the show this morning by talking about the situation in Zimbabwe, where the military has put Robert Mugabe under house arrest. And it seems more than likely that we will end up with the military in control for quite a while. I don't see a situation where those soldiers are going to go return to their barracks, restore Mugabe to power, and everything is going to be hunky-dory between them. That can't happen. That's not the way that you end up with interaction between the military and civilian rule when a person is put under house arrest. Then we talked about the situation in the Caribbean, and I pointed out one particular country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I'm going to read a portion from the Antigua newspaper, and it's entitled St. Vincent's PM Defense Cabinet Reshuffle. It says Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves has defended the decision to reshuffle his near two-year-old administration that resulted in his son Camilo being named as the new Minister of Finance. Gonsalves said that it was important for the new Minister of Finance to be in place before the presentation of the 2018 budget estimates. Is quoted as saying, "It was important that I make the change, and there is some distance before the estimates are presented to Parliament," Gonsalves told listeners in a radio show owned by the ruling United Labour Party on Friday. And then he goes on to talk, the article talks about the fact, it says the 45-year-old Gonsalves will take up the position that was held by his 71-year-old father since the ULP came to power in December 9th, 2015 general election. Prime Minister Gonsalves has been Minister of Finance since 2001 when the ULP first came to office. Prime Minister Gonsalves will remain Minister of National Security and Seaport Development, Immigration and Legal Affairs. But the younger Gonsalves, who retains the portfolios of economic planning and sustainable development, will, however, shed ministerial responsibility for industry, information, labor, postal service, and the Bureau of Standards. Political observers say the cabinet shuffle could provide an indication of the direction in which Gonsalves wants the ruling party to go as it prepares for a new leader and the country a new prime minister. Gonsalves told radio listeners that the discussions on the budget estimates is a cabinet exercise and that he continues to chair cabinet. But he's quoted as saying, "But Camilo assumes day-to-day responsibility for finance as of today. In fact, yesterday I had a meeting, blah, blah, blah." So what, again, political observers see it as a move for him to solidify the position of his son to assume leadership later on. Again, you get the family ties, the linking in one family one member to the next moving forward. We're fortunate that we don't have that here in Cayman. You have your political parties and you have the movement of the leadership within the political parties. We know, for instance, that the current situation, our premier at the end of this term cannot be premier for more than 2 consecutive terms. So I am sure that within the Progressive Party, there must be some plans in place as to who will replace him as premier if they become the governing party again, or who will lead the party, who would take the party forward in terms of the next elections.
It's very interesting that you use the word who will lead the party in the next elections, because we have a situation right now. Where you have the speaker, Mr. Bush, is the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, and he's also still the leader of the CDP, the Cayman Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. Now that is a conflict of interest, and because it's not complementary to the office of speaker, because once you become speaker, you do not have to divest yourself. You do not have to leave your political party. You can be a member of your political, but you have to leave all executive positions that you had in your political party, because the speaker is supposed to be not involved in politics. He's supposed to be not involved in confrontational politics. He's supposed to be as neutral as possible. And you remember we spoke to Mr. Bush on the radio here several days ago. And he agrees with me that these things are obtained in other countries, but he said they haven't reached Cayman yet.
There are no provisions here.
There's no provision, but we need to put them in place because in every other country, once you become speaker, you divest yourself from all executiveship in your party. Even in other places where you have the speaker, his seat, once he becomes speaker, it's almost safe, because all the parties in those jurisdictions agree not to run anyone against the speaker and his riding and his electoral district, and so the speaker really comes in unopposed. And why is that, Orit, that you come in unopposed? It's because we did not have to go out and to fight for your seat and to get in confrontational politics and become partisan, and so. It seems to me now that Mr. Bush cannot continue to be speaker and continue to be the leader of his party. The leadership now should go to somebody else, and not him, because it conflicts with his role as speaker.
And we just saw recently where one prominent person within that party has
perhaps that's one of the reasons why, I don't know, but I know that is why Mrs. Borden has resigned from the party, and she has been the longest chairman of the party. I think she's been there now 5 or 6 years as chairman of the party.
One of our listeners has given us a quote from attributed to Sir Winston Churchill, and it reads, "Many know when to rise to an occasion, but very few know when to sit down." Yep. Many don't know when to give it up. Give it up. It becomes addictive. That power becomes addictive, and as a result of that yearning and that zest for power, people suffer. As a result of that as well. Do we have any calls, Miss Susan? No calls.
Yes. So again, I'm doing a lot of listening and just kind of to see what I can add, just to add some flavor and color to what you're saying. So this whole issue of governance in the Caribbean, I remember that I read somewhere during the summer there was a lecture that was presented in the Caribbean about and a cook can govern, and it dealt with Plato, Trump, and the leadership in the Caribbean by business people. And one of the questions that was raised in that particular lecture, I believe, dealt with whether or not it is reasonable to elect business people in leadership positions as opposed to politicians. The question that was asked was whether or not a billionaire, can you imagine a billionaire, that's a business person, having significant concerns for folks that are unemployed. I think that was a general question. I mean, it's not every billionaire that is insensitive to the public and public participation. I mean, so you have people like Sir Richard Branson, for example, who is very pro people and developing communities for people to have equality. So they were concerned about creating a system where we don't have a lot of resources in the Caribbean, and you have to invite outside investment into the Caribbean. Many people in the Caribbean tend to have that are pretty poor, and how are we expecting to have our local leadership lead with a view to enhance and encourage public participation and democracy?
Okay, we have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning again, Mr. Cornyn.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Very interesting topic you have this morning.
Thank you.
And, good for us to remember that we too are still under Great Britain. And there's certain things that are happening in this island that is not in the best interests of good governance. Yeah? Because there is different pockets of corruption within the police force and other areas that is not being addressed. And I've been asking questions several times about the immigration, the labor problem here, which is causing a lot of unrest, unemployment, and a lot of increase in crime. Right? And I think these things need to be looked at, especially with the immigration, where a lot of outside elements are coming in here and not obeying the laws, such as advertising properly, and immigration granting permits to people who are not fulfilling the requirements for an application for a work permit. So I'm still trying to find out if this is the law. Mr. Miller said the problem is it is not being enforced. I would like to find out, if not by the British government, but soon be interested to find out. Why is it not being enforced? That is my question again. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you very much, caller, for that. Well, we heard in the Finance Committee, the Premier spoke about, what is being done as far as the workforce. No, not Workforce Development Agency, but setting up this new employment regime that's going to be in place, and that there are going to be more checks and balances in the system when it comes to work permits. So, we await those changes within the Immigration Department to see what happens in that regard, as well. Let's take a commercial break now. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Dr. Steve Macfield, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. Ms. T, before we went to, or while we were in the commercial break, you were responding to my response to the caller in relation to the new regimes that are being proposed and that are being set up to deal with the employment of Caymanian situation, as well as the abuses that we hear that take place, within the employment sector, as well as the advertising for work permit renewals, work permit grants, and everything. You want to repeat those comments?
So it's the ability for any administration to balance the need of the people with a sense of urgency and balance the needs of the economy. And if you listen to what folks are saying on the street, is that sense of urgency isn't there. You listen to people saying that, that yes, steps are being taken. However, how do I feed my family today? These are the expenses that I have. The cost of living is very high. Today, a lady pointed out to me very recently, and again, this is something that doesn't relate directly to the issue, but it speaks to the how complex it is. When you bring in labor, for example, and they're not earning a living wage, and you have to consider how they live. We know that you can't really live. The minimum amount that we're now and having to pay people is not sufficient for them to live properly. So we have to consider how those folks who come here live, and what happens if there is a possible outbreak because they don't have the resources to live in an environment that prevents that. Most of the funding, most of the monies that they make while they're here is repatriated to their communities. So they really live on skeleton salaries. And you and I go to the restaurant all the time. Suppose someone from this environment goes in there and has something, and that leads to an outbreak. And, you know, those of us who have perhaps a different lifestyle will be subject to the same outbreak because sufficient attention isn't being paid to folks who we have living with us, and they're not being paid appropriately. This is something that we tend to ignore because somehow we believe it's not going to affect us. So that's one of the issues that you see arising from something like that. It's not only we as Caymanians that will suffer because adequate steps aren't taken at the pace that is necessary to ameliorate some of the concerns that we have. But you have, parallel to that, is the type of economy that we're developing through the development of poverty as well. So the two things are side by side, and I'm not sure if the steps that we ought to be taken to really address this are being taken.
I'm looking at this article. Go ahead, Dr. Macfield. Go ahead.
I agree with you, the steps, but it's more than the steps. It's the whole foundation of the system, how it works. And unlike the issues we opened this morning with about the tribalism in Africa and the different tribes and stuff, and how the colonial system carved those people up and even put one tribe in the territory of the other tribe, that caused a lot of social and economic and political and armed conflict. We do not have that situation in Cayman, but what we have in Cayman is a lack of deliberation. We have produced few leaders who are deliberate leaders. We have not produced a lot of deliberate leaders. We have leaders who are too weak and affable. They capitulate to everything that money, somebody comes from outside. They do not understand that everything has value. I remember one time I had a certain piece of land, and the guy was always asking me to sell it to him, and I says to him, "Why you want me to sell my place?" There is pride in ownership, and so they do not understand that our culture, our way of life, the way we see things different from other people is part of our being, and they have sacrificed that for other people's way of life and culture and stuff and things like that. And that is the reason why I keep saying that what has happened to the continuation of the era of the Benson era. I don't see those kind of men anymore. And that is what we need. We need deliberate men. We need men who are deliberate leaders, and women who are deliberate leaders who can actually say yes and who can actually say no when it needs to, and not hide behind the master starter trait of being, well, I'm in charge, and it's my decision, and so forth. That self-justifying rationale will only bring conflict in the future, and as I see it, and that is not good for us, because we are small enough, and like as I said, we don't have the conflict of tribalism, and we're small enough to be able to get this right. One of the things that I see that we need to do in the country, I know that there's a lot of legislation and stuff, is we need a fair trade competition law to curb people from getting too much and taking too much land and extending themselves into many businesses and putting the average person out of the competition to have a business. We need to do that. We need to do that in this place. We need to do that quickly. Not a sales of goods law and so forth. We need a fair trade competition law. A fair trade competition law would deal with the whole idea of immigration and work permits and salaries and the whole thing like that. That's what we need to do, and we need deliberate men who can do that instead of men who are too affable and too compromising.
You mentioned the acquisition of land, but what do you do when people want, because in order for you to buy land, someone has to be willing to sell it. So if a person is willing to sell their property to someone else, how do you go about restricting them from selling it? But we
need to start to sit down and have some sort of compromise about leaseholds instead of outright deliberate sale. That's what we need to start. We need to start to talk about leasehold instead of freeholds. We need to do that.
You want to say something?
Yeah, but the point is, Caymanians must have a willingness to have this desire or to have this conversation. We speak as though foreigners, and I say this generally, the impression that you will get from time to time is that foreigners are bad and investors are bad. And I'm not saying that that's the case. I always start with us as the local people and our own behavior. And foreigners only take advantage of us because we're easy prey to the extent that they do.
Or because we allow them to.
We allow them to do that.
So Steve, that's what I'm saying. You can't blame folks that come here, and I'm not saying you do. I'm just saying, generally speaking, when you hear the conversation that folks have about foreigners and taking this and taking that away from them, we give it to them. So we have to start looking to us and our behavior as well.
That's what I say, that we need deliberate leaders who have the vision and the transition and the temperament of the Benson era. We don't have those anymore, and so now it's a free for all. And when it's a free for all, you don't have to give people anything. People just come and take it.
Okay, I want to read. We have one caller. We're going to take the caller. We have a break in about 4 minutes. If we have to break, we'll ask the caller if he wants to hold on while we take the break. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. I'm listening again, and again, you are generating, prescient thoughts and things that we should be concerned about. But as you will know, these things are not new. These things are not new. It is what is new is our continuing failure to deal with them. All the issues that you are raising, Mr. Moderator, and your co-hosts and co-moderators are not new, because if you recall, in the Cayman Islands in transition, I talked about these things, but you came close, but you didn't mention another phenomenon, which I would like to mention. Nobody is mentioning the sex workers that is around here, necessitated in many cases by people who need to supplement their income.
Yes.
And in a transient society, that is one of the first things that rears its ugly head and is a threat to the society for various reasons. And in the Cayman Islands in transition, I detailed an example citing what happened when myself and a colleague minister brought some people in here to investigate into that phenomenon. But nobody is paying attention to these kinds of things. And so the question I wish to pose, ladies and gentlemen, is, are we now developing a culture of poverty?
Good question. Is that a rhetorical one? Do you want to comment to that, caller, please?
Yes, I will.
Yes.
And the answer is yes, we are. Yes, we are developing a culture of poverty, and I hear it on your show, Mr. Moderator. Thank God for you. I hear it on your show ever so often. Too many people are falling through the cracks. Too many people are falling through the cracks. and only window dressing is made to deal with these problems. I don't know how we're going to address the business of the land. Gerard talked about that the last time I called on your show. I made mention way back in 1953. It's a sad case happening here now. I see for the first time, I see the manifestations of homelessness. Yeah. And we have one of the highest bank foreclosure rates in the world. Why? And yet we boast that we are one of the most affluent societies. It's a contradiction. And I've been saying this for years. We have been measuring our progress on a Falter report card. And the good school teacher I am, I know what I'm talking about. Because few Caymanians can be held up as examples of economic successes in this country. Few.
And that number is becoming fewer and fewer as well.
So President Borden, let me ask you a question then. Caymanians who are affected by these prevailing controlling forces, what can they do? What can they do now, if it's not too late? What can they do now to counteract these prevailing controlling forces?
Okay, caller, Mr. Borden, we're going to ask you if you can hold on. We're going to a quick news break. If you can hold on, we want to continue with this conversation. Just hang in there for a few minutes for us, please. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. Before we went to our headline news, we had on the phone with us former teacher, former member of the Legislative Assembly, former minister who had education under his belt as well, author, current president of the University College of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Roy Borden. Mr. Borden, are you still with us, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
Good morning, and please continue.
So I was saying, Dr. McPhee asked, what is the solution? So the solution, as I see it, lies largely with education. But here's the challenge, and I know this firsthand because, as you know, I'm on the front line. Now, our young people are saying, sir, we don't understand. They told us to get education, and so we're coming back with degrees, but we can't get work because they tell us all kinds of nonsense, including that we don't have experience. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, we have a problem. There are too many inconsistencies. And where are the inconsistencies? It's obvious. I don't have to answer that. That's a rhetorical question. Where are the inconsistencies? Where is the protection for Caymanians? And let me say this. As a Caymanian, I emigrated and I lived in another society. I lived in Canada. I went as a landed immigrant. I understand the rules. Look, they told me, you are not a citizen, therefore you can't get certain jobs. You can't work for the federal government. Certain things preclude you because certain privileges are reserved for citizens. Now, I say in Cayman, when they tell us nonsense about we have an entitlement culture, we have to, because that's what citizenship means. If I, as a citizen, don't have any more advantage over someone who just comes off the plane, what is the use of my being a citizen then?
Yeah. And it's not reciprocal in other countries where you go to.
But Mr. Borden, people that just come off the plane now have the same rights because they have Cayman status. So then what happens to those of us that were here before?
Well, if you notice in my writings, I talk about established Caymanians. That's the distinction I make. That's the category we fall in. The three of you on the show and myself, established here from generations. So that we have to find a way to giving us advantage. We have to be what is called in Latin primus inter pares, first among the equals. So we need to work that out, and that needs to be worked out at the level of the Legislative Assembly. That's where that needs to be worked out.
Yes, sir.
Otherwise, gentlemen, I'll sign off on this. We're heading for problems. I give it 1 decade more. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
10 years
or
more.
less, or even
I
less.
give it 10 years more.
Yep.
Thanks for entertaining my diatribe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much for
your
being so
wisdom
patient.
and for your vision and your wisdom.
And what he's saying is right. And people will say that we're being alarmist and everything else. But the more Caymanians you get with an education, and the more Caymanians you find without the opportunities that they expect to come with that education that they have, the more disgruntled Caymanians that you're going to have. And then how long are people going to stay disgruntled? I'm looking at this article here in Cayman News Service. Premier defends need for immigration. And I'm going to just read parts of it. Premier is quoted as saying, "I know it's a bad word in some quarters, but it is immigration that has allowed these islands and all of us to develop the way we have," he told parliamentary colleagues. While he agreed that the situation had to be properly managed, he says, quote, "Cussing the foreigner and saying that nobody should be granted status was the kind of thinking that had set other places in the region, such as the Bahamas, far behind." And he's quoted as saying, "Properly managed, immigration provides opportunities for our people." The Premier stated adding that this belief was the major difference between his administration and the policy position of the opposition. The Premier said he believed that immigration has provided the current economic foundation that Cayman now enjoys. He said he had the very best interest of young people and their futures at heart, and ensuring there would be opportunities for them. But, he said, there was no future in isolationist policies and overprotectionism, or constantly hammering the source of Cayman's prosperity. I'm trying to find a part here. Okay, here. He spoke about the problem of entitlement, which you heard Mr. Borden just speak about as well, and accused the opposition and local talk shows of promoting the idea that people are automatically entitled to something just by being Caymanians, calling this a disservice. So Mr. Borden has retorted, and we agree with him, that the mere fact that you are Caymanian entitles you, should entitle you, must entitle you to something. And I would add to that, if there wasn't something inherently good about being a Caymanian and that entitlement, why are there so many people craving to get Caymanian status?
And suing for it.
Yes.
And suing for it. You know, see...
So they must see something good in it, an entitlement.
What Mr. Borden is saying is true. I see there's a degree of lawlessness. I see there's a degree of lawlessness creeping into the country. You just have to drive early in the morning, for instance. Even when I come down at 6 o'clock in the morning, I see people, because they figure that the police is not out on that time of the morning, I'm doing twice the speed limit, 6 to 7 to 8 miles an hour, passing me on the wet roads. It's like, you know, the ethics of law-abiding citizens are sort of gone. People are not using their rationale to say, well, you know, it is 40 miles an hour and the roads are wet, and I might have an accident with somebody or do something. They just this lawlessness, even in traffic and even in the courts, and now there's the sound of the gun is now taken over from the sound of the street chimes of the church bells. So what the leadership do not seem to get is that you cannot destroy the deepest hopes and aspirations of the Caymanian people and then request that they refrain from lawlessness. That's what Mr. Borden is probably saying. It will come if you do not expand their hopes and their aspirations, and if you keep doing what you're doing by bringing cheap labor in, paying people $6 an hour, when you can't live in Cayman at $6 an hour unless you live in 10 to a room. This is what the results will be. It's inevitable. I mean, history is all around you to see what has happened to other places.
We have one caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome back to For the Record.
Good morning again. Just one quick question.
Sure.
I also mentioned just now about the foreigners. I did too, but a lot of these problems are not just caused foreigners. It's our own Caymanians in top positions that are not doing what they should do. A lot of them are good so-called Christian people, but they keep forgetting let the children first be employed before the foreigners. Right? Now, you said a few weeks ago that people don't want to say who they are. Well, before I say what I'm going to say next, I am a Christian, right? And what I would suggest as a means of this, that employers do not be given any permits more than 40% of their workforce. So you're going to have 6% Caymanians before you can get, and you cannot get more than 40% of your workforce as foreigners. Right? Now, one other question is, we have, just use one example because there are many around. You have Cook Supermarket, the Home Center, car park, jewelry stores. I am just wondering how many of those employees are Caymanians.
Okay. We're not able to answer that here, caller, but it's a rhetorical question as well, and we want to thank you for that. We have one more caller. Let's see if we can take that caller before we go to our break. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning. Good morning, OC, and good morning to your two guests.
Good morning. Good morning.
This is Gilbert McLean. I heard my good friend and former colleague in government there, Roy Barton, call in a while ago, and
Yes.
as usual, he makes a whole lot of sense, and he's taken the time, like yourselves, to look at our Cayman situation. It really grates, I think, when you referred to the article and on the Cayman News Service and the Premier saying that he is he's going to do everything to see that there's opportunity for the young Caymanians and the professionals who are qualified and to get jobs. I mean, it's been proven that that's false. Because, and again, Dr. McPhail asked Roy what could be done about the situation. Well, what needs to be done about the situation is to reverse some of the things that's happening. It's this government, the PPM government, now made up of various parts, that has done what is the most detrimental thing to us ever when it comes to immigration, and that's when it changed the rollovers that used to be in place that recognized contract law. If you hire someone for 3 years, at the end of 3 years they leave, or 5 or 6 as the case may be. Now everybody that comes to Cayman has the right to stay and continue on indefinitely. Which civilized country on earth could believe that that is in the best interest of its people? The numbers that are coming in terms of cheap labor is overwhelming the whole population, changing the whole population. So how on God's earth does that provide for opportunity for those our own, the generationals that we send out, say, go get a good education and you come back here? If I'm not mistaken, OC, I understand now that if you have we don't promote anymore within government departments, for one thing, or ministries or whatever, that when someone is qualified, when naturally by help me with the word there, when you move up opportunity to have that job, if there is even a person qualified to take that job, you have to advertise it supposedly to get the best that there is. How can it possibly make rational sense that you are going, when you're advertising a government job, that you're going to open that across the earth. And if you find someone who supposedly is better than your best locally, you're going to import them in.
Mm-hmm.
It is illogical. It is insane, I suggest. And it shouldn't happen. And on top of that, now, I also understand, and this is obviously something that is against the Caymanian and their opportunity again, is that the head of department or within the government system, for example, it's not even decided by the head of department, the interviewing of persons. Now, that has to be outsourced. What that's doing is making money for the private sector and, again, giving opportunity to import people into the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard Roy say he gives it another 10 years before something happens. It's going to happen before that. It is actually happening now.
Yes.
The things that are happening now is signs of the time.
Yep.
It's going to get more serious, and it should. I mean, the government has to act on behalf of its people, and the opposition and anyone, including your good selves, which I'm glad that these talk shows, is raising the issues, and the government has to stop what it's doing and do what is right. And it seems to be clear and right to everybody else besides those in the government. Anyway, thank you very much, folks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, caller, for that. We're going to take a commercial break. For the record, we'll return shortly. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve Macfield. I have a few WhatsApp messages as well as emails, so I want to read those as well. The one person says, I agree fully with Dr. Steve about the dire need for a fair trade competition law. Yesterday's Compass's editorial really tells us what these U.S. vulture capitalists think of us. It notes that what some see as negative impacts of development, blocked views, paved over green spaces, or noise where there was once silence, rather it exhorts to not look to the good old days, but to embrace economic development to improve the quality of the lives of the citizenship. Clearly, there is a huge dichotomy here. I agree with President Biden's remarks also. Then a person has walks up and says, I agree, but what happens is that the foreigner comes here, puts in their allotted time of 9 years, applies, and including filing suit in our courts, and then once they obtain their rights, they then exercise their newly gotten rights to their full benefits. We Caymanians, on the other hand, we sit back and claim to be peace-loving whilst we are fully exploited, a sad state of affairs. What the another then writes and says, what the Honourable Premier recently said in the Parliament only serves to embolden those who are now exploiting us, Caymanians, and are now further emboldened to further have added permission to do it with license. I want to, in all fairness, in relation to the Cayman News Service article that I read portions of it, I want to read this portion as well. When the Premier speaks about the fact that this is an incredibly dangerous mindset and is going to undermine the ability of Caymanians to who truly aspire and truly achieve in their own country. However, McLaughlin stressed the fact that there are challenges to Caymanians getting opportunities, and not all employers are prepared to give locals opportunities. Saying this was the other side of the coin. So he said that that's the other side of the coin. The flip side of the coin was that not all employers are prepared to give Caymanians opportunities. And he goes on to state then that government was therefore striving to make the work permit system more transparent and would penalize abuses, he said, but emphasize the need for balance and not killing the incentives for business. His government, he said, would foster an environment where businesses want to cooperate. So we look forward to that, but it needs to come quick. It needs to come real quick.
No.
It needs to come right away. People,
yeah, exactly. Not 2 years from now.
Okay.
And if they ask me, I would do it for nothing. I could help them with what I know about the system, how it works in other jurisdictions where I lived, and how work permits are granted to people who were not Canadians and so forth. But of course, I guess I am not on any side, so I guess I will not be called upon. But we can't wait for 2 years to have a reaction to this. We can't wait for 2 years.
I'm not sure that he said 2 years.
No, but
that's the figure that you're putting on it.
No,
Okay.
no. But I think earlier it says that the reforms in the immigration system would come in 2 years, and the employment system would come in 2 years. I think that was Mr. Soku or somebody who said that. I can't remember.
Okay.
Who said that?
During the debate or during the finance committee?
That's right.
Okay.
That those things would come in 2 years or something like that, or they said it would take 2 years for the reforms to come for the new system to be in place.
Okay, one of our listeners, again, has sent in a WhatsApp, says, "Good morning, folks. Thanks for letting us know what's really going on around here, and a big vote of no confidence for the government." And I'm just reading it like I said, like I got it, not trying to bring the government down.
No.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Ms. T, we haven't heard from you.
No, I was just saying that I was just reminded of a comment that George Lamin made some years ago. George Lamin is one of our writers from the Caribbean, I think he's from Barbados. I think he's Barbadian. But one to the whole idea of the colonial history and the type of government that we tend to have in communities with English colonial past, in that one government, there's no real ideological difference between one government to the next. And what he said at one point was that the only difference is I'm in and you're not. Mm-hmm. And we have we've done really well collectively as governments from time to time in focusing on the economy and trying to get that right. But now I think it's time that we spend some more time and with a sense of urgency focusing on the social and cultural needs of the community, because you can't tell someone that something is going to happen in 2 years when they need food to eat today. So I would encourage all of the folks that we elected recently to give significant thought to how they proceed going in the future, and the level of acrimony that we tend to see has to find its way in the back seat and put in the community first.
Yeah, we have to treat with some urgency the concerns that people have expressed. The anxieties that people have, we have to treat that with some urgency.
They're real.
Yes, yeah. Dr. McField.
Well, I just would like to say, as passing, I just wrote down a few notes here. All right, I would like to say, and use them as my closing remarks as well.
Okay, yeah, go right ahead.
I'll say, where's the clear and futuristic vision in this country? I just don't see it. I mean, I see a lot of people getting elected, and I wonder, well, what is their experience to run a country? Politics as a talking point is okay, but then you have to understand how society works and how to run a country and how to benefit people. And I say, where is the political umbrella to protect the Caymanian people from cultural and economic extinction? Where is that umbrella? Because I see no signs of historical connections, for instance, with the Benson era. And I go back to that era because that was the era that was the formative era. That was the era between us in the past and the future. That was the point between the past and the future. In the Benson era, men and women stood on feet of iron, and now men and women are standing on feet of clay and sand. That's what it seems to me. And I would say, all right, rhetoric has now become the reality, and mediocrity is now the substitute for experience and passion. And one thing I know that it cannot be refuted is that the boom of the guns has now replaced the sweet chimes of the church bells. And again, slackness, corruption, nepotism, and conflict of interest is now the new religious opiate. And I will leave you with this. Political birds of a feather flock together.
Well, and I just want to mention also that there are two prominent positions within government. One is the Solicitor General's position, and the other one is the deputy to the ombudsperson and the ombudsman.
They have not been.
We haven't heard anything about them, and I'm not sure whether or not they're waiting until the dark of the weekend. You normally hear about the dark of the night. I'm talking about the dark of the weekend. And the reason that I say the dark of the weekend is because when you make those announcements on Friday, and it is an announcement that you know that is not going to find favor with many people, there's little time to react on a weekend. You know, there's not a stage for you to get on, but we do have social media now. I'm reminded of that,
and we have this radio show.
Yes,
program.
Well, we have it.
Yes. Now we have it today.
How long? I don't know.
Yes, we have it today. Yes,
but it'll be interesting to see when those announcements come, and not only when they come, but what are the results of the announcements. We want to see whether or not Cayman is moving forward, or if Cayman is moving backwards. If Caymanians are moving forward, or if Caymanians are moving backward. We want to see whether or not all Caymanians will rise with the tide, or only those who are sitting in their luxury yachts. And the rest, if you don't have a boat, you can't ride with the tide. Or if you have a leaking boat, you won't ride with the tide either. So we wait and we see the results of those announcements in terms of the appointments, and whether or not they're Caymanians or non-Caymanians. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Miss Mary, have a happy birthday tomorrow when it comes. And for all of those others of you who may have a birthday either today or an upcoming one again, also enjoy those. Those are your days. Those are memorable days for you, and enjoy them as well. I say to you, continue to listen to your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Banks at 12 noon for a talk today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.